All right, so we're going to talk about CVs, what they are, what they aren't, and how to make one for yourself, and what to keep track of and think about when you're preparing a CV. So the first thing is that CV. The letter CV stand for Curriculum Vitae, which is Latin for like your life's work in some sense, which sounds very daunting. But that kind of is what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a single document where someone can look at it and say, "Oh, you've done all these things," and then they can go all the way down and get a good picture of what your academic and professional career has been like up to this point. And so your CV should definitely be a living document. You should be looking to update your CV often. And that in itself is a bit of an exercise. Just remembering to update it and keeping it up to date is, can be a chore sometimes, but it is important. So coming up with a strategy of consistently updating your CV is in itself very important. But let's talk a bit more about the details. So your CV again is this big summary of your life's work and your accomplishments. And the idea is that it's usually used for things like if you're submitting for a job, if you're applying for a job, or if you're applying for grant proposals, or anything where you are trying to put yourself out there to receive some kind of, again, job or grant money, anything that you're trying to bring into yourself or put yourself out there. That's what your CV is used for. So, when you apply to graduate school, often they'll ask for a CV as part of your application to the school. And so that's why it's important to have one even as early as your undergrad career, because very quickly people are going to start asking for your CV, and so it's good to have something ready. It may not be perfect in the undergrad phase, and it's certainly not complete because it's supposed to be your life's work. And if you're only an undergrad, then your life's work is nowhere near done. But it's important to have something to put together and to give a summary of who you are and what you've done. CVs are very similar to, but definitely different from resumes. A resume is supposed to be a single page. It's supposed to be a very, very condensed version of who you are and what you've done. That single page limit is very strictly enforced for a resume. Whereas for a CV, there is no page limit. And in fact, some CVs are very long. And that's okay. They're supposed to be. If someone wanted a very, very short document, they would ask for your resume. But often in academia, they ask for your CV, because in academia, there's a bit of a broader kind of spectrum of work that we do in academia. And so it can't really be properly captured in a single page resume. But so resumes and CVs, they're very related, very similar, but distinct. And so you could think of it that all resumes are CVs, but not all CVs are resumes in some sense. And while it is also kind of important to have a resume kind of in your back pocket, in academia, people don't ask for your resume as much, so it's not something you have to update as much, or to have on hand as easily as, say, having your CV, which you should always be ready to kind of send as an email to someone. But okay, so now we've kind of defined what a CV is, or the uses for it. Let's talk a bit about what goes in a CV. There's no single correct way or to put items on your CV or to format your CV. There are certainly items that are very often included on people's CVs, and conversely, there are items that people exclude from their CVs. But there's no one way to do this. And I think maybe an example, I can pull up mine as an example of what some common categories are. I think mine is well, maybe I'm biased, I made it, but I think it's a fairly average in terms of what I put on it kind of CV. So one thing that's very important is that at the top, you want to include your name and you want to include all your contact info, just like you would on a resume. So I put my email address, I do have a website, put an office number and my Twitter handle, as well as my mailing address at the school that I'm at. This is pretty standard because, again, if you are applying for a job or you're looking for a grant or a fellowship that you applied for, you want them to be able to contact you to tell you that you've been given the job or awarded the grant money. So this is very standard to have your contact info at the top. Next, it's very common to include a section on your education, just a brief overview of where you have attended and the degrees that you've earned. And so this is my section here. Then it's very, very common to include this section, which we call appointments. And appointments are kind of a fancy academic world lingo for jobs. These are the jobs that I've held. But in academia, they like to call them appointments for whatever reason. You could just as easily put jobs up here and no one would bat an eye. But so this is a very brief summary of the jobs that I've worked in the past, and of course the times that I've worked in the rough years. Now, it's important though that when you're including the jobs that you've performed, on your CV, particularly if this is an academic CV and you're applying for academic jobs or academic fellowships, it's important to only include the jobs that you've done that are relevant to your research, your academic professional life. So for example, I've also worked at a golf course. I did that for a couple summers in high school and in college, early college, but that's not something that I would include on my CV because it's not relevant to my work in astronomy. The exception is that, or it's okay to include jobs that are not necessarily within the academia world, but only if they're relevant to your research in academia. And so, for example, I did work as a data engineer for a private company for a couple of years, and I was doing a lot of software development, and so that is relevant to my research, and so that's why I've included it in my CV. Next, a very common section to include on CVs is your teaching experience, if you have any. Now, this is something that certainly very few undergrads have because just undergrads are not teaching. Very few undergrads are TAs. I do know of some that have been TAs, and it's very different for every school in the country and around the world. But if you do have teaching experience, whether that's formally like in a classroom, as part of the college, or if you've been a tutor of a certain class, this is an area that you could put information about that. And again, this is just something that maybe gets filled in a little later in your career as you just do this more. But it's important to remember, as you do begin to teach, it's important to keep track of those classes and the times that you've taught them because you will want to put them into your CV. Next, it's very common to have a section which goes by many names, but I've called it honors, awards, and fellowships. This is just a list of the ways that I've been recognized in various fashions. And it's kind of a place that you can brag about yourself a little bit. It's okay to promote yourself and be proud of the accomplishments that you've earned. And so a lot of people will have this section as well. Next, I've included this community service and outreach section. I really like this section. Not everyone has one, but I think it's important because I think as part of being in science and academia, I think also giving back to the community and teaching, in a public outreach setting, I think these are important things. And so I try to do these things a lot. And so for that reason, I wanted to include it on my resume. And so, for example, I've included my mentor position here in the summer course. And I've just given a brief description of what the course is so that someone who would be reading this resume would know just kind of a simple 2-sentence answer of what this class is. And so another thing, though, is just like with appointments or jobs, it's wonderful to be doing community service and outreach outside of your academia professional life. For example, maybe volunteering at a local soup kitchen or you know, cleaning up the local river. Those are wonderful things, but they're not really relevant to an academic CV. These should be community service outreach that are relevant to kind of the field that you're in. Another thing that some people will include, and I have, is a list of presentations. So I've been lucky to go to a couple conferences and give a couple talks. And so I've just listed them here. That's something, again, that as you progress through academia and through your undergrad and perhaps grad student and beyond, as you move through this part of your life, you'll accumulate presentations, or you will have given many presentations. And so this is just a place that you can kind of compile all those. I included this one. This section is actually brand new for me because I only just completed this course, professional development. I did a workshop on learning how to be a better software engineer, and so I included that as like a kind of a way to show that I'm trying to work on myself, both as a astronomer, but also as a person, and learning more skills. So this is something you could put on as well. And then lastly, or not lastly, but I do have a section on some press coverage that my research has gotten. A couple popular science articles have been written about a paper that I wrote. So I wanted to compile them here, but this is not necessarily even common maybe in a resume. But so these are the general kind of sections of a resume. But again, there's no formula to this. You can include some of these sections. You can exclude other sections. However it works for your life, your career. Because again, it really is your CV, and so it should be tailored to your life. And that is to say that, again, maybe at this stage in your life, you're high school right now, or you're in the early stages of your undergrad career. Maybe again, you haven't given a presentation at a conference, and that's totally expected. And so you wouldn't have that section yet. But then when that day comes where you do give a presentation, then you can create that section and update your resume. The thing about resumes is that they really highlight kind of the good things that you've done, the accomplishments that you've made in your career. And so that's always changing as you're growing and learning and becoming a better scientist just through the act of practicing science. Your resume your CV will grow with time. It is that living document. And so that's why it is important to be updating. Maybe every couple months, or if you do go give a presentation, you that day maybe update your resume before you forget, your CV. I keep saying resume, but update your CV, that night after you give the presentation before you forget. Real quick, I'll show you an easy way of how to get your own resume started. I think it was last week we learned about Overleaf and LaTeX. So I've logged into my Overleaf account. If I just hit New Project, and then I scroll down here to resume or CV, there's a bunch of templates here that you can choose from. These people have very kindly put together these templates, and you can kind of get a sense for what they look like from these preview pages. There's like a ton of pages on the site of these templates, but let's just click on one. For example, so then you say open as a template, and now all of a sudden I'll have a new Overleaf project, which will have all this code pre-written into it. And some of them will have some kind of notes to you saying these are custom commands, I guess, but let's scroll a little further down. It says CV starts here. So now it says, here's where you should be inputting your name and your phone number or email, whatever you want to put in here. Feel free to delete things. If you don't want your phone number, just delete it. No problem. Here's a section where your heading is, and they've very nicely filled in an example. So you put in the name of your institution here, and then the degree that you've earned, as well as the dates, and perhaps you put your GPA. If you don't want to do that, just delete it, and so forth. So these templates are designed to kind of get you started, and then you kind of fill in the rest there. So this is an easy way to kind of get your feet wet with a template, with a CV. Let's do another thing I wanted to say was. Let's see. Oh, yes. So I've said that you do want to be updating it, and so something that I personally do is If something pops in my head I want to add to my CV, I always immediately write it down on a sticky note or a piece of paper, just because I know I'll forget it. And having a kind of a source of maybe just sticky notes saying, oh, add this to your CV, that will, trigger your brain at one point to say, oh, I better actually go update it. Because it is important. You'll be amazed at the things you can't remember, a couple months later that you want to know the details of, and then you forget. For example, if you did go give a presentation at a conference, a couple months later, maybe you forget the date of the conference, or you forget, your poster number, perhaps. Those kind of things might be important. But I think in general, the most important thing you can do with CVs is just look at other people's. I guarantee you that any academic professional that you've interacted with, they have a CV. Most of them will have websites, and almost everyone puts their CV on their website. So you can feel free to just go to your, if you have an advisor, or if you have a professor that you've taken a class with in college and you're curious to know more about them, I guarantee you they have a CV, and you can read theirs and kind of get a sense for what other CVs look like. Because again, mine is just one example. And there's no right or wrong way to do this. So looking at more examples will help you learn about what you want to put on your CV. The last thing I want to say is something that's relatively new to me. I only learned about this maybe 2 months ago. And it's kind of the opposite of a CV. It's called a failure CV. And I wrote up a little bit for myself here. It's called a failure CV. And the idea is that a CV is supposed to be this glowing document of all your accomplishments and all the things that you've done and you've earned, and how wonderful of a researcher you are. And so when you do go look at it, say your favorite professor's CV, like you'll read it and you'll be like, wow, they won all these grants, and they did all this outreach, and they got into these great schools, like all these wonderful things. And it'll seem like everything just always fell in their favor and everything worked out for them. But that's very often not the case. Even people who are very successful in the sciences, struggle tremendously through their career, through high school and undergrad and graduate, and they apply for things and they don't get them, and fellowships don't come their way, and grant money doesn't come their way. And, maybe they applied for telescope time and they didn't get it this semester or this year. And so none of that information ever makes it onto a CV, because it's not considered like an accomplishment. Oh, I didn't get this fellowship, so I'm not going to put it on my CV. If I did get the fellowship, I would put it on my CV. But so there's been this new kind of trend of creating what they call a failure CV. And it's supposed to be the opposite of a CV. It's supposed to highlight all the things that you didn't get, and all the schools you didn't get into, and all the grant money that you didn't win. And the idea is to kind of make our field, I would say our field astronomy, but this works for all fields, to make our field a bit more transparent to kind of like the roadblocks that even successful people go through. It's not supposed to be embarrassing. It's supposed to be in some ways humbling, in some ways very transparent. And the idea is, just share the things that didn't go your way. Because then if you do become a professor one day, if you choose to pursue that route, and then you're mentoring, a high school student, and they say, oh, I applied to these things and I didn't get them. And you say, well, look at all the things I didn't get, and here I am. And so it's supposed to be partially inspirational, and partially humbling. And so I think it's a wonderful thing. So I took the time to put together my own failure CV. I have a list of schools that I did not get into. I have a list of jobs that I was rejected from. I have a list of fellowships and grants that I didn't get. And so again, the idea is to just show that, while I'm a grad student and I've gotten into grad school and I'm loving it, I'm having a great time and I'm working hard. But it wasn't necessarily easy or a straight path or anything like that. And so, I think generally the fields of science, I think, would be a better place if more people created these failure CVs as a way of showcasing that it's not necessarily an easy path, and anyone who it looks like they had it easy, I guarantee you they had stumbling blocks too. And if they overcame their stumbling blocks, you can overcome your stumbling blocks. Um, so yeah, I wish that people had been doing this 30 years ago, so that we'd have these failure CVs that were, really long of people who are very successful, and you can just see how even success had its rough spots. But unfortunately, this is a new phenomena. So I guess all that to say is that, if in 20 years we want people to have these kind of expansive failure CVs so that we can point to and say, look how it wasn't easy, and look how you can do it too. That means we need to start today, and that means that's our generation of people who are currently in high school, currently in undergrad and grad school, starting to create these and share them openly as a way of making all of science just kind of more accessible and transparent, and just kind of a better community in general. So I do encourage you to kind of keep track of the things that you don't get, because then when you do get things and you look back and you say, oh wow, look how far I've come.